A 7-year-old boy walked into a motorcycle club and said to the bikers, "Hi, sir. My dad has a tattoo just like yours." The leader of the Iron Brotherhood looked at him and asked, "What's your father's name?" When he answered, every single man there froze. That name carried weight. Marcus Chen wasn't just anyone. 12 years ago, he was the road captain of the Phoenix chapter. He led every major ride, planned every route, and never once left a brother stranded on the highway. Then one winter, he told them his wife was pregnant with their first child. He said he couldn't keep living a life where one wrong turn on a dark road could leave his son without a father. He didn't make excuses. He just walked away. And Jackson Rivera, the club president, told him one thing: "You'll always be family." But right now, all they knew was the boy's name. "I'm Ethan," he said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but his eyes were steady. "Ethan Chun." Jackson Rivera stepped forward. He was in his early 60s, silver hair tied back in a ponytail, arms covered in faded ink, the kind of man who commanded respect without raising his voice. He looked at Ethan the way you look at someone carrying a burden too heavy for their years. "Where's your father, Ethan?" The boy didn't flinch. "He's at home. He's hurt really badly." The men exchanged glances. Jackson crouched down to meet Ethan at eye level. "What kind of hurt?" "There was an accident," Ethan said. The words came out measured, as he'd practiced them. "A drunk driver hit him 3 weeks ago. He was walking home from work. The doctors said he needs multiple surgeries. His spine, his legs, everything." One of the men, a younger biker named Tyler, stepped closer. "How bad is it?" Ethan looked at him directly. "They said he might never walk again. Not without the surgeries. And they cost a lot." The silence that followed was heavy. Jackson stood up slowly. He could feel every pair of eyes in the room on him. "How much are we talking about?" "The first surgery alone is $67,000, Ethan said. "Then there's physical therapy, more surgeries after that. The doctors said it could be over $120,000 total. Maybe more." The number hung in the air like smoke from an exhaust pipe. Nobody moved. $120,000 wasn't just a large sum. It was the kind of number that made you reconsider everything you thought you could do. Jackson looked around at his brothers, then back at Ethan. "Does your father know you're here?" Ethan nodded. "He told me to come. He said if there was one place left in the world that remembered who he was, it would be here." That hit harder than any punch Jackson had ever taken. Marcus Chun had left the club to protect his family. He'd worked construction jobs, warehouse shifts, anything to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. He'd stayed away because he thought that was the honorable thing to do. He never asked for anything, never came back looking for favors. But now he was broken, lying in a hospital bed, and he'd sent his son, the very reason he left, to ask for help. Jackson ran his hand through his hair. The weight of the moment pressed down on everyone in the room. They all knew what this meant. Helping Marcus wasn't just about money. It was about whether the promises they made to each other actually meant something. It was about whether brotherhood survived distance and time. "How did you get here?" Jackson asked. Ethan shifted his weight. "I took 2 buses. It took me almost 2 hours." 2 hours? Tyler looked at the kid with disbelief. "You're 7 years old, and you took 2 buses across the city by yourself?" Ethan shrugged. "My mom couldn't leave my dad at the hospital, and I didn't know who else to ask." Jackson studied the boy for a long moment. Then he looked at the men gathered behind him. "Give us a minute, Ethan." The boy nodded and stepped back toward the entrance. The bikers huddled together, voices low and tense. Ethan couldn't hear what they were saying, but he could see their faces. Some looked worried. Some looked angry. One of them, a broad-shouldered man with a thick beard, just looked sad. After several minutes, Jackson turned back to Ethan. "Where's your mom now?" "She's at the hospital with my dad," Ethan said. "She hasn't left his side since the accident. She sleeps in the chair next to his bed." Jackson closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "All right," he said. "Come inside." They walked into the clubhouse. It was a large space with concrete floors, a bar along one wall, worn leather couches, a pool table, and walls covered in photographs. Pictures of men on motorcycles, long highway stretches, camping trips, and memorial services. Ethan looked at each photo as he passed, searching for his father's face. Jackson pulled out a chair for him at a round wooden table. He sat across from him. The other men stayed standing, leaning against walls, arms crossed, waiting. "Tell me everything," Jackson said. "When did the accident happen? What exactly did the doctors say? What's the plan?" Ethan took a breath. His composure had held up remarkably well, but now his voice started to waver. "It happened 3 weeks ago. Dad was walking home from his shift at the construction site. It was dark. A car came out of nowhere. The driver was drunk. He hit my dad and didn't stop. Someone called 911. They said if the ambulance had been 5 minutes later, he might have died." Jackson's jaw tightened. The other men shifted uncomfortably. "Go on," Jackson said quietly. "They took him to County General. He broke his back in 2 places. His left leg was crushed. His right hip was shattered. The doctors did emergency surgery to stabilize him, but they said he needs at least 2 more major surgeries to even have a chance of walking again. And without the surgeries?" One of the older bikers, a man named Curtis, asked the question no one wanted to hear answered. Ethan looked down at his hands. "He'll be paralyzed from the waist down. He'll be in a wheelchair for the rest of his life." The room went completely silent. Jackson leaned back in his chair. He stared at the ceiling, processing everything. "How much have you already paid?" "We didn't have much to begin with," Ethan said. "Mom's been working at the diner for 8 years, but we were just getting by. Dad's construction job paid okay, but we didn't have savings. The emergency surgery cost $18,000. The hospital said we have to pay at least $15,000 up front before they'll schedule the next surgery. And we don't have it." "What about insurance?" Tyler asked. "Dad's company had basic coverage, but it doesn't cover most of this. They're calling it an accident outside of work, so workers' comp won't help either. We're on our own." Jackson stood up and walked over to the bar. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, stared at it for a moment, then drank it in one motion. He poured another, but didn't drink it. He just stood there, gripping the glass. Finally, he turned around. "Your father was one of the best men I've ever known, Ethan. When he was part of this club, he never let anyone down. Not once. And when he left, he did it for the right reason. He did it for you." Ethan's eyes began to well up, but he blinked the tears back. "I know." Jackson walked back to the table and sat down. "But you need to understand something, kid. What you're asking for, it's not simple. $120,000 is more money than most of us will see in a year. We're not rich. We work hard. We have our own families, our own bills. Helping your father means every person in this room is going to have to give up something." Ethan's voice was small but firm. "I know, and I'm sorry, but my dad said you would understand. He said if anyone in the world remembered what loyalty means, it would be you." Jackson stared at the boy, 7 years old, and carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked around at the men. One by one, slowly, they nodded. Jackson let out a long breath. "All right," he said. "We'll figure something out." Ethan's face crumpled. The tears he'd been holding back finally came. He covered his face with his hands, his small shoulders shaking. Jackson reached across the table and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "You did well, kid. Real good." Ethan looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Jackson nodded. Then he looked at his brothers. "We've got work to do." None of them knew how hard it would be. None of them understood what it would cost them. But they all knew one thing. Marcus Chin had been one of them. And when you're one of them, you don't get forgotten. Not even after 12 years. Tell me from which city and country you're watching. Stories like this reach farther than we imagine. After Ethan left the clubhouse that evening, Jackson sat alone at the bar. The others had gone home to their families. The lights were dimmed. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. He poured himself another drink and sat with it, thinking. Marcus Chun. He hadn't spoken that name aloud in years. Not because he'd stopped caring, but because some memories hurt more when you disturb them. Marcus had been more than a club member. He'd been Jackson's right hand, the one person he could count on when things went bad. And things had gone bad more than once. Jackson took a sip and let himself remember. Marcus joined the Iron Brotherhood when he was 26. He'd been working dead-end jobs, drifting through life, looking for something that felt like purpose. A lot of guys showed up like that. Young, searching, thinking a leather vest and a motorcycle would solve whatever was broken inside them. Most didn't last 6 months. They wanted the image without the responsibility. They wanted the freedom without the commitment. Marcus was different. From day one, he didn't just show up. He showed up early. Every meeting, every ride, every charity event, Marcus was there. If someone needed help moving, Marcus brought his truck. If someone's bike broke down at 2 a.m., Marcus was the first call. He didn't do it for recognition. He did it because that's who he was. Jackson remembered one night, maybe 8 months after Marcus joined. There was a situation at a bar downtown. One of the younger members, a hothead named Danny, got into it with some locals. Words turned into shoves. Shoves turned into a full-blown brawl. By the time the club arrived, Danny was on the ground getting stomped by 5 guys. Jackson and a few others jumped in, but it was Marcus who turned the tide. He went straight for the biggest guy, took a bottle to the shoulder, but didn't stop until Danny was pulled to safety. Afterward, sitting in the ER waiting room, Marcus had 12 stitches in his shoulder and blood all over his shirt. Jackson asked him why he'd done it. Why would he put himself in danger for someone he barely knew? Marcus looked at him like the question didn't make sense. He's my brother. That's what we do. That was Marcus Chun in a nutshell. He didn't need elaborate explanations. Loyalty was simple to him. Over the years, Marcus became indispensable. When the club organized cross-country rides, Marcus planned the routes. When disputes broke out between members, Marcus mediated. When someone's kid needed help with homework, Marcus tutored them. He wasn't the loudest guy in the room. He wasn't flashy. But everyone knew that if Marcus said he'd handle something, it was handled. Jackson took another drink. Then there was Lily. Marcus met her at a community center where the club was doing a toy drive for kids. She was a volunteer, helping organize donations, quiet and kind with a smile that could light up a room. Marcus couldn't take his eyes off her. He started volunteering at every event she was at, just to be near her. It took him 4 months to ask her out. When he finally did, she said yes before he finished his sentence. They got married 2 years later. Small ceremony at a park, just close friends and family. Jackson was Marcus's best man. During the reception, Marcus pulled him aside and said something Jackson never forgot. I never thought I'd have this. I didn't think I deserved to be this happy. Jackson told him he was wrong. He told him he deserved every good thing coming his way. 3 years later, Lily got pregnant. Marcus was terrified. He came to Jackson one night, sitting outside the clubhouse under the stars, and confessed he didn't know if he could be a father. He'd grown up in foster care. He didn't have a model to follow. Jackson told him the same thing he'd told him years before. You're one of the best men I know. You'll figure it out. For a while, Marcus believed him. But then the fear started growing. Marcus started thinking about the risks. The Iron Brotherhood wasn't a criminal organization. They didn't run drugs or guns. But life still came with danger. Rival clubs, accidents on the highway, late-night calls that sometimes turned violent. And beyond the danger, there was the time commitment. The club demanded loyalty. Meetings, events, and rides that lasted weeks. Marcus loved it, but he started realizing that if he kept living that way, his child would grow up barely knowing him. And he couldn't accept that. One night, about 2 months before Ethan was born, Marcus called a private meeting. Just him and Jackson. They sat outside on their bikes, engines off, nothing but the sound of distant traffic. Marcus told him he was leaving. Jackson didn't argue. He didn't try to change his mind. He just asked one question. You sure about this? Marcus nodded. I can't do both. I can't be the father I need to be and still give this club what it deserves. It's not fair to Lily. It's not fair to my son. Jackson understood. It hurt, but he understood. The door stays open, Jackson said. You ever want to come back, you come back. No questions. Marcus shook his hand. I appreciate that, man. But I don't think I will. And he didn't. For 12 years, Marcus stayed away. He didn't disappear completely. Jackson would see him around town occasionally. They'd exchange nods, maybe a few words, but Marcus kept his distance. He thought that was the right thing to do. Jackson respected it. Now, sitting alone in the clubhouse, Jackson realized something. Marcus had been right. He'd made the hard choice. He'd sacrificed something he loved so his son could have a father. That took more courage than most men possessed. And now that same son had walked through their door, asking for help. Jackson finished his drink and stood up. He pulled out his phone and started making calls. The next morning, the club gathered again. This time, everyone was there. 18 men, sitting around the same table where Ethan had sat the night before. Jackson stood at the head. "All right," he said. "Let's talk numbers." Tyler, who'd done some research overnight, pulled out a notebook. "I called the hospital. Spoke with the billing department. Here's the breakdown." He flipped through his notes. Marcus needs 2 major surgeries. The first one is spinal reconstruction. That's $67,000. The second is hip and leg reconstruction. That's another $48,000. Then there's physical therapy, medication, and follow-up appointments. All in, we're looking at around $135,000. Curtis whistled low. "That's more than we thought." "It's more than most people make in 2 years, Jackson said. "But it's not impossible." One of the men, a mechanic named Ray, spoke up. "How much have they already paid?" "About $18,000 for the emergency surgery," Tyler said. "Cleaned out what little savings they had. Lily's been trying to get loans, but they keep getting denied. They need $15,000 just to get the first surgery scheduled." Another member, a warehouse worker named Dominic, leaned forward. "So we need to cover at least $117,000. The numbers settled over the room like a weight. Jackson looked around the table. "I know what you're thinking. That's a lot of money. Some of you have kids in college. Some of you just bought houses. Some of you are barely keeping up with your own bills. This is going to hurt." Nobody argued. "But here's what I'm asking," Jackson continued. "Marcus gave up this club so his son could have a father. Now he's broken, lying in a hospital bed, facing life in a wheelchair. And that little boy took 2 buses across the city to ask us for help. He didn't go to a church. He didn't go to a charity. He came here because his father told him we'd remember what loyalty means." He paused. "So I need to know, are we the kind of men who remember? Or are we the kind who forget?" The men started nodding. Curtis spoke first. "I'm in. I'll put in $4,000. Ray raised his hand. "I can do $3,000. Dominic nodded. "Same. $3,000. Tyler looked at his notes. "I don't have much saved, but I can cover $1,500. Around the table, every man pledged what he could. Some had more than others. Some had to stretch just to offer a few $100s. But everyone gave something. When it was done, Jackson added up the numbers. "We've got $35,000 committed right now. That covers the upfront cost for the first surgery and then some. We're still short $82,000 for the rest." "We'll figure it out," Curtis said. "We always do." Jackson nodded. Then he pulled out his checkbook. "I'm putting in $12,000. That brings us to $47,000. We need to raise the rest." One of the younger members, a guy named Aaron, spoke up. "What if we organize a benefit ride? Charge entry fees, sell raffle tickets, and get local businesses involved." "We've done it before," Ray said. "For other causes. It works." Jackson nodded. "All right. Aaron, you take the lead on organizing it. I want it done in 3 weeks. We need that $15,000 to the hospital as soon as possible, or they won't schedule the surgery." Aaron nodded. "I'm on it." Jackson looked around the table. "Does anyone else have ideas?" Dominic raised his hand. "I know a guy who owns a bar on 5th Street. He owes me a favor. I'll ask if he'll host a benefit night. Live bands, donations at the door." "Good," Jackson said. "Make it happen." Curtis leaned back. "What about Marcus? Does he know we're doing this?" Jackson shook his head. "Not yet. Ethan's going to tell him today." "How do you think he'll react?" Tyler asked. Jackson thought about it. "Knowing Marcus, he'll try to refuse. He'll say he doesn't deserve it. He'll say we shouldn't put ourselves through this. But we're doing it anyway," Curtis said. "Damn right we are," Jackson replied. The meeting ended. The men dispersed, each heading off to figure out how they'd come up with the money they'd promised. Some would pick up extra shifts. Some would sell things they didn't need. Some would ask their families for understanding. It wasn't going to be easy, but nobody complained. That afternoon, Jackson drove to the hospital. County General was a massive complex on the east side of the city. He parked in the visitor lot and made his way to the fourth floor, room 428. Lily was sitting in a chair beside Marcus's bed. She looked exhausted. Her hair was pulled back, her eyes red from lack of sleep. When she saw Jackson, she stood up quickly. Jackson? Marcus was lying in the bed, monitors beeping softly around him. He looked thin. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. But when he saw Jackson, he tried to sit up. Don't, Jackson said. Stay down. Marcus settled back. Lily told me Ethan went to see you. Jackson nodded. He did. Marcus looked at his wife, then back at Jackson. I didn't ask him to do that. I know, Jackson said. But he did it anyway. And I'm glad he did. Marcus shook his head slowly. Jackson, I can't ask you guys to help with this. You're not asking, Jackson interrupted. We're offering. Marcus closed his eyes. You don't understand. It's too much. It's over $100,000. $135,000, Jackson said. Give or take. We know. Marcus's voice broke. I can't pay that back. Ever. Nobody's asking you to. Jackson, Marcus started to protest, but Jackson cut him off. 12 years ago, you made a choice. You left the club so you could be a father. That was the right choice. And now you're hurt, and your son needs you. So we're going to make sure you can walk again. That's it. That's all that matters. Marcus didn't say anything. He just stared at his hands, clenched into fists on the thin hospital blanket. Jackson sat down in the chair next to Lily. The doctors say without the surgeries, you're looking at life in a wheelchair. With the surgeries, you've got a real shot. So we're doing this. The club's already committed $35,000. We're raising the rest. In 3 weeks, you're getting that first surgery. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. Why? Jackson looked at him steadily. Because you're one of us. And that's enough. Marcus broke. He covered his face with his hands and cried. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just quiet, shaking tears. Lily moved to his side, wrapping her arms around him. Jackson stood up. I'll be in touch. As he walked toward the door, Marcus called out. Jackson. Jackson turned. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, Jackson said. Just get better. He walked out of the hospital, got on his bike, and rode back to the clubhouse. The whole ride, he thought about Marcus, about loyalty, about what it really meant to be brothers. He didn't know if the surgeries would work. He didn't know if Marcus would fully recover. But he knew one thing. They were going to fight for him. Every single one of them. Because that's what family does. Would you have done the same if you were in his place? The benefit ride was scheduled for Saturday, 3 weeks after Ethan walked into the clubhouse. 3 weeks to organize everything, spread the word, and hope people showed up. Aaron took the lead. He designed flyers, posted them on social media, and reached out to other motorcycle clubs in neighboring cities. The entry fee was $25 per bike, and all proceeds would go toward Marcus's medical bills. There would be raffles, food vendors, and live music at the finish point. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but if they pulled it off, they could raise a significant portion of what they needed. The uncertainty was the hardest part. You never knew how many people would actually show up until the day arrived. Jackson tried not to think about it too much. He focused on what he could control. He reached out to old contacts, called in favors, made sure every member of the Iron Brotherhood was on board, and spread the word. Some of the guys were stressed. Curtis had to take a loan from his brother to cover his $4,000 pledge. Ray picked up overnight shifts at the garage, working 16-hour days. Dominic hadn't told his wife yet exactly how much he'd committed, and the guilt was eating at him. But nobody backed out. For days before the ride, Dominic finally told his wife, Sandra. She was folding laundry in their bedroom when he sat on the edge of the bed and said, I need to tell you something. She looked up, concern crossing her face. What's wrong? I committed $3,000 to help a guy from the club. He was in a bad accident. He's paralyzed. Without surgery, he'll never walk again. Sandra stared at him. $3,000. Dominic nodded. I know it's a lot. I know we were saving for the vacation, but Sandra, this guy, he's got a 7-year-old son. The kid came to us asking for help. I couldn't say no. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then she sat down next to him. Is this the same guy who left the club years ago to take care of his family? Dominic blinked. How do you know about that? You told me about him once. You said he was one of the good ones. Dominic nodded. He was. He is. Sandra sighed. She looked tired, but then she reached over and took Dominic's hand. We'll figure out the vacation. Do what you need to do. Dominic let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. Thank you. Don't thank me, Sandra said. Just make sure he walks again. By Friday night, the club had raised another $11,000 through individual donations, the bar benefit Dominic organized, and several local businesses that contributed. That brought the total to $58,000. They still needed $77,000 to cover the full cost. Everything now depended on Saturday's ride. Ethan didn't know about the benefit ride until Aaron stopped by the hospital to drop off a flyer. Ethan and his mom were in the cafeteria, grabbing lunch, when Aaron found them. Hey, Aaron said, handing Ethan the flyer. Thought you'd want to see this. Ethan looked at it. His eyes went wide. Are you doing this for my dad? Aaron nodded. The whole community's invited. We're hoping to get a few hundred bikes out there. Can I come? Ethan asked. Aaron smiled. You're the reason we're doing it, kid. Of course, you can come. That evening, Ethan showed the flyer to Marcus. His father was awake but groggy from medication. When he saw it, his face went pale. Are they doing all this? Marcus whispered. Ethan nodded. Jackson said the whole city's going to be there. Marcus closed his eyes. I don't deserve this. Dad, Ethan said, sitting on the edge of the hospital bed carefully. You spent your whole life helping people. You left your club so you could take care of me. You gave up everything. Now it's their turn to help you. Marcus looked at his son. His eyes filled with tears. I'm scared, Ethan. Of what? What if the surgery doesn't work? What if I put everyone through all this, and I still can't walk? Ethan took his father's hand. Then at least you tried. And at least you'll know people cared enough to fight for you. Marcus couldn't speak. He just held his son's hand and cried quietly. Saturday morning came with perfect weather. The sky was clear, the temperature warm but not too hot, a light breeze keeping things comfortable. The starting point was the clubhouse parking lot, and by 8 a.m., it was already filling up. Motorcycles lined up in neat rows. Harleys, Indians, Yamahas, Kawasaki's, custom choppers, sport bikes. Some riders came solo. Some brought passengers. There were leather vests, bandanas, and patches from clubs all over Arizona and neighboring states. The sound of engines created a constant rumble that felt like thunder rolling across the pavement. Jackson stood near the entrance, greeting people as they arrived. He'd been there since 6 a.m., and his voice was getting hoarse from thanking everyone, but he didn't stop. Tyler was handling registration at a folding table. Every time someone paid their $25 entry fee, he marked it down in his notebook. By 9 a.m., they had 187 bikes registered. That was $4,675 just from entry fees. The raffles and food sales would add more. Curtis was working the raffle table. Prizes had been donated by local businesses. Restaurant gift cards, motorcycle maintenance services, a weekend trip to Sedona, and custom leather work. Tickets were $5 each, and people were buying them by the handful. Ray was manning one of the grills. Hot dogs, burgers, brats. All proceeds went to Marcus. A line formed almost immediately, and Ray worked the grill like a machine. Dominic was managing the sound system. A local rock band was setting up to play after the ride. They'd agreed to perform for free, just asking for donations. And then Ethan arrived with his mother. Jackson saw them first. They were standing at the edge of the parking lot, looking overwhelmed by the sheer number of people and motorcycles. Marcus was supposed to be there too, but the hospital wouldn't release him for the day. Jackson walked over. You made it. Lily nodded, her eyes already wet. Jackson, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, Jackson replied. Just watch. At 9:30, Jackson climbed onto a small platform near the clubhouse entrance. Someone handed him a microphone. The crowd slowly quieted down. All right, everyone, Jackson's voice boomed across the parking lot. Thank you for being here. I'm not going to make a long speech because that's not what today is about. But I do want to introduce you to someone. He gestured toward Ethan and Lily. This is Ethan Chun. His father, Marcus, was one of us. 12 years ago, he rode with us, worked with us, bled with us. Then he became a father, and he made the hardest choice a man can make. He walked away from something he loved so his son could grow up with a dad who was there. That's the kind of man Marcus is. The crowd was completely silent. 3 weeks ago, a drunk driver hit Marcus. Broke his back in 2 places. Crushed his leg. Shattered his hip. The doctors say without surgery, he'll never walk again. The treatment costs over $130,000. Marcus and his family had already spent everything they had on emergency care. They were out of options. So Ethan, this 7-year-old boy, took 2 buses across the city to find us. He came to our clubhouse and asked for help because his father told him that if there was one place in the world that still remembered who he was, it would be here. Jackson paused. And he was right. Because today, we're riding for Marcus. Every dollar we raise goes toward giving him his life back. So let's make some noise, and let's show this family what brotherhood really means. The crowd erupted. Engines revved in unison. People cheered and whistled. Ethan started crying. Lily pulled him close and cried with him. The ride itself was about 65 miles. A scenic loop through the desert and mountains, past red rock formations and small towns, ending back at the clubhouse. It wasn't about speed or competition. It was about showing up. About being present. Ethan and Lily rode in a support truck driven by Aaron. They followed the long procession of motorcycles, watching the seemingly endless line of bikes stretch out ahead of them on the highway. At one point, Ethan rolled down the window and leaned out, feeling the wind and listening to the thunderous sound of hundreds of engines. He looked back at his mother and smiled, really smiled, for the first time in weeks. When they returned to the clubhouse, the band was already playing. The parking lot had transformed into a full festival. Families sat on blankets eating food. Kids ran around playing. The raffle was still going strong, and more people had arrived while the ride was happening. Tyler walked up to Jackson with his notebook, a huge grin on his face. "You're not going to believe this." "How much?" Jackson asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Tyler's grin widened. $48,000. Entry fees, raffles, food sales, and direct donations. Some guy I've never seen before just handed me a check for $8,000. Said he heard about Marcus on the radio and wanted to help. Jackson stared at him in disbelief. $48,000. $48,000, Tyler confirmed. Jackson did the math quickly in his head. They'd started the day with $58,000. Now they had $106,000. They weren't quite there yet, but they were so close. Jackson found Lily and Ethan sitting under a tree, watching the celebration. He walked over and sat down on the grass next to them. "Are you doing okay?" Jackson asked. Lily nodded, wiping tears from her face. "Better than okay." Jackson smiled. "Got some news. We raised $48,000 today. Combined with what we already had, that's $106,000 total. We're almost there." Lily covered her mouth with her hand. "Oh my God. We're going to get the rest," Jackson said. "I promise you that. Marcus is getting those surgeries." Lily broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. Ethan moved closer to his mother, wrapping his small arms around her. Jackson stood up and walked back toward the clubhouse, his heart full. That evening, after most people had left, Jackson and the core members of the Iron Brotherhood sat around a table in the clubhouse. Aaron tallied up every donation, every entry fee, every raffle ticket. By the end of the night, with a few additional last-minute donations, the total came to $109,000. "We're still $26,000 short," Aaron said. Jackson nodded. "But we've got momentum. Word's getting out." Curtis leaned forward. "I've got an idea. What if we reach out to the media? Local news. Tell Marcus's story." Ray nodded. "Human interest piece. People love this kind of thing." Jackson thought about it. "Marcus is a private guy. He might not want that attention." "Then we ask him," Dominic said. "But if he says yes, it could make all the difference." The next day, Jackson went to the hospital and talked to Marcus about it. Marcus was hesitant at first, but Lily convinced him. "If it helps, we do it," she said. So they did. A local news station came out and interviewed Marcus in his hospital bed. They interviewed Ethan. They interviewed Jackson. The story aired 2 days later. The response was overwhelming. Within 48 hours, donations started pouring in through an online fundraiser Aaron had set up. $500 here. $1,000 there. Small amounts from dozens of people who saw the story and wanted to help. By the end of the week, they'd raised another $32,000. Total, $141,000. More than enough to cover all of Marcus's surgeries and physical therapy. When Jackson told Marcus, the man cried so hard he couldn't speak for several minutes. I don't know how to thank all of you, Marcus finally said. You don't have to, Jackson replied. Just get through this. That's all the thanks we need. Marcus wiped his eyes. I'm going to make it, Jackson. I have to. I can't let everyone down. You won't, Jackson said firmly. You're going to fight, and you're going to walk again. And when you do, we'll be there waiting. The first surgery was scheduled for the following Monday. It would take 6 hours. The surgeons would rebuild Marcus's spine using metal rods and screws, trying to restore structural integrity and relieve pressure on the spinal cord. The entire Iron Brotherhood showed up at the hospital that morning. They filled the surgical waiting room, sitting in chairs, standing against walls, pacing the hallways. Ethan sat between Jackson and Curtis, nervous and quiet. Lily paced near the window, unable to sit still. 6 hours felt like 6 days. Finally, the surgeon emerged through the double doors. Dr. Patricia Morrison was in her late 50s, a renowned orthopedic surgeon with silver hair and steady hands who had performed thousands of complex procedures. She pulled down her surgical mask and looked at the crowd of bikers filling the waiting room. Her expression was unreadable at first. Family of Marcus Chun. Lily rushed forward. I'm his wife. Dr. Morrison nodded. The surgery went well. We were able to repair the spinal damage and stabilize the vertebrae. He's in recovery now. Lily's legs almost gave out. Curtis caught her elbow, steadying her. Does that mean he'll walk? Ethan asked, his voice small but desperate. Dr. Morrison looked at the boy and softened her expression. It means we've given him the best chance possible. The spine is repaired, but there's still a long road ahead. He'll need the second surgery on his hip and leg, then months of physical therapy. But yes, if everything continues to progress well, there's a very good chance he'll walk again. The waiting room erupted in cheers and applause. Grown men hugged each other. Some wiped tears from their eyes. Jackson stood in the back, watching it all, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders that he'd been carrying for weeks. When can we see him? Lily asked. He'll be in recovery for a few hours, Dr. Morrison said. Then we'll move him to the ICU for monitoring. You can see him this evening, but only the immediate family for now. Lily nodded, then turned to look at the bikers who'd filled the room. Dr. Morrison, these men, they're family too. The doctor looked at the crowd, understanding crossing her face. She'd seen the news story. She knew what these men had done. I'll see what I can do, she said with a small smile. That evening, they allowed Lily, Ethan, and Jackson into the ICU. Marcus was connected to various monitors, for lines running into his arms, but his eyes were open. When he saw them, he smiled weakly. Hey, he whispered, his voice hoarse from the breathing tube they'd removed an hour earlier. Lily rushed to his side, taking his hand. Hey yourself. How do you feel? Like I got hit by a truck, Marcus said, attempting a joke. Then his eyes found Ethan. Come here, buddy. Ethan approached carefully, as if afraid he might hurt his father. Marcus reached out and took his son's hand. You saved my life, you know that? Ethan shook his head. I just asked for help. That's all you needed to do, Marcus said. You were brave when I couldn't be. His eyes shifted to Jackson, standing at the foot of the bed. And you, Jackson. I don't have words. Jackson stepped closer. Then don't use any. Just focus on getting better. The second surgery is in 3 weeks. Marcus nodded slowly. I'll be ready. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus focused on healing from the first surgery. He did breathing exercises to prevent pneumonia. He worked with physical therapists on upper body strength. He endured the pain and the frustration of not being able to move his legs yet, holding on to the hope that the second surgery would change that. The Iron Brotherhood visited in shifts. There was always someone there. Ray brought magazines and audiobooks. Dominic brought homemade meals from Sandra. Curtis sat and watched sports with Marcus, providing a sense of normalcy. Tyler brought Ethan by after school several times a week, helping the boy with homework in the hospital room while Marcus watched. Jackson came every few days, never staying long, just checking in, making sure Marcus knew he wasn't alone. The second surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in late October. This one was even more complex than the first. Dr. Morrison and a team of surgeons would rebuild Marcus's shattered hip using a titanium implant and reconstruct his crushed left leg with plates, screws, and bone grafts. The surgery was expected to take 8 hours. Once again, the Iron Brotherhood filled the waiting room. This time, they knew what to expect. The long wait, the uncertainty, the anxiety. But they also had hope. The first surgery had been successful. Maybe lightning would strike twice. Ethan was quieter this time. He sat next to Jackson, staring at his hands. "You okay, kid?" Jackson asked. Ethan shrugged. "What if something goes wrong?" Jackson put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "Then we deal with it. But you can't think like that. You have to believe it's going to work." "How do you do that?" Ethan asked. "How do you just believe?" Jackson thought about it. "You focus on what you can control. Right now, you can't control what's happening in that operating room. But you can control how you support your dad. And you can believe in him because he's one of the strongest men I know." Ethan nodded slowly. 8 hours and 20 minutes later, Dr. Morrison emerged again. She looked exhausted but satisfied. Lily, who'd been pacing for hours, rushed forward. "How is he?" "The surgery was successful," Dr. Morrison said. "We were able to reconstruct the hip and repair the leg. The bone grafts took well. He's in recovery now." "Will he walk?" Lily asked the question everyone wanted answered. Dr. Morrison chose her words carefully. "The structural repairs are solid. We've done everything medically possible. Now it depends on Marcus, on his willingness to push through the pain during physical therapy, on his determination. Based on what I've seen of him these past few weeks, I'd say his chances are very good." Lily broke down crying. But this time, they were tears of relief. That night, when Marcus woke up in the ICU, the first thing he did was try to wiggle his toes. He couldn't. Panic set in immediately. He tried again. Nothing. Lily noticed his distress. "Marcus, what's wrong?" "I can't move my toes," he said, fear evident in his voice. "I can't feel my legs." Lily pressed the call button. A nurse came quickly, then called for Dr. Morrison. The doctor arrived within minutes and performed a neurological exam. She pricked Marcus's feet with a sharp tool. "Can you feel this?" "Barely," Marcus said. "It's very faint." Dr. Morrison nodded. "That's actually a good sign. You have some sensation." The surgery was invasive, and there's significant swelling around the spinal cord. As the swelling goes down over the next few days, sensation and motor control should improve. "But what if it doesn't?" Marcus asked. "Then we reassess," Dr. Morrison said honestly. "But Marcus, you need to give your body time to heal. You just had 8 hours of surgery. Don't expect miracles overnight." Over the next week, Marcus obsessively tried to move his toes every few hours. On day 3, he managed to move his right big toe slightly. On day 5, he could wiggle 3 toes on his right foot. On day 7, he could move all the toes on both feet. The feeling was still diminished, but it was there, and it was improving. Dr. Morrison was pleased with his progress. "You're healing well, Marcus. We'll start physical therapy next week. It's going to be painful and frustrating. But if you commit to it, I believe you'll walk again." Marcus looked at Lily, then at Ethan, who was sitting in the corner doing homework. "I'll commit," he said, "whatever it takes." Physical therapy began 2 weeks after the second surgery. The first session was humbling. The therapist, a woman named Karen with 20 years of experience, helped Marcus sit up on the edge of the bed. Just that simple movement left him exhausted and in pain. "We're going to take this slow," Karen said. "Today, we're just going to work on sitting balance and weight shifting." "That's it." Marcus nodded, sweat already forming on his forehead. Over the next month, physical therapy became Marcus's entire world. Every day, twice a day, he worked with Karen. They progressed from sitting to standing with assistance, to taking a single step with a walker, to taking 3 steps, then 5, then 10. Every step was agony. His body had been broken and rebuilt, and now he was asking it to remember how to do something as basic as walking. There were setbacks. Days when the pain was so intense he couldn't complete a session. Days when frustration overwhelmed him and he wanted to quit. Days when he wondered if all of this effort was worth it. But every time doubt crept in, he thought about Ethan, about the Iron Brotherhood, about the hundreds of people who'd donated money, who'd believed in him, who'd invested in his recovery. He couldn't let them down. 3 months after the second surgery, Marcus took 50 steps with a walker. Karen was thrilled with his progress. 4 months in, he took 100 steps. 5 months in, he traded the walker for a cane. 6 months after the second surgery, on a warm April afternoon, Marcus walked into the clubhouse without any assistance. Jackson was sitting at the bar when Marcus walked through the door. For a moment, Jackson didn't recognize the man standing there. Marcus had gained back weight. His color was healthy, and he was standing on his own 2 feet, walking slowly but steadily. Marcus? Jackson stood up, his eyes wide. The other men in the clubhouse turned to look. Curtis dropped the wrench he was holding. Ray nearly knocked over his beer. Ethan came running in from outside. "Dad, you did it." Marcus smiled, tears streaming down his face. "I did it." Jackson crossed the room and pulled Marcus into a bear hug. The other men gathered around, clapping Marcus on the back, shaking his hand, some openly crying. Marcus looked around at all of them. "I wouldn't be standing here without you. Every single one of you. You gave me my life back." Jackson shook his head. "You fought for it. We just gave you the chance. That's all brotherhood is," Marcus said. Giving each other a chance. Over the next few months, Marcus continued to get stronger. He graduated from physical therapy. He started working part-time at a community center, teaching kids about motorcycle safety and mechanics. He couldn't ride yet, his doctors said, maybe in another year, but he could be around the bikes, around the culture he loved. The Iron Brotherhood had changed, too. Inspired by Marcus's story, they'd started a non-profit organization dedicated to helping people in the community who faced catastrophic medical bills. They organized quarterly benefit rides, raised money, and connected people with resources. Marcus became actively involved, using his own experience to help others navigate the nightmare of medical debt and recovery. Ethan grew up surrounded by the Iron Brotherhood. They became his uncles, his mentors, his extended family. He learned about loyalty, about showing up, about what it means to be part of something bigger than yourself. 2 years after that first surgery, the Iron Brotherhood held its annual rally. Over 500 bikes showed up. And for the first time since his accident, Marcus rode. Jackson had helped him find a modified Harley with extra back support and controls adapted for his rebuilt hip. When Marcus pulled into the rally on that bike, the crowd erupted in applause. He rode slowly up to the main stage where Jackson was standing. Marcus cut the engine and carefully dismounted. The crowd was silent, watching every movement. Marcus walked up the steps to the stage, Ethan beside him. Jackson handed him a microphone. Marcus looked out at the sea of faces, many of them strangers who'd helped him, who'd donated, who'd believed. 3 years ago, I was told I'd never walk again, Marcus began, his voice strong. I was told my life as I knew it was over. But then something happened. My son, who was only 7 years old, decided he wasn't going to accept that. He took 2 buses across the city to find the men his father used to ride with. And those men, they didn't hesitate. They didn't ask what was in it for them. They just showed up. Marcus paused, composing himself. This community, this brotherhood, they raised over $140,000 to pay for my surgeries. They visited me in the hospital. They supported my wife and son. They refused to let me face the darkest time of my life alone. And because of them, I'm standing here today. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Marcus waited for it to quiet down. I learned something through all of this. I learned that loyalty isn't just about being there for the good times. It's about being there when everything falls apart. It's about showing up when it's hard, when it costs you something, when there's nothing in it for you except knowing you did the right thing. He looked at Jackson, standing beside him. Jackson Rivera and the Iron Brotherhood saved my life. But more than that, they showed my son what it means to be a man of honor. And for that, I will be grateful every day for the rest of my life. Marcus turned to Jackson and extended his hand. Jackson took it, then pulled Marcus into an embrace. The crowd roared its approval. That evening, as the sun set over the rally grounds, Marcus sat with Jackson, watching Ethan play with some other kids. I never thought I'd be here again, Marcus said. I thought that part of my life was over. Jackson looked at him. It was never over. You just took a different road for a while. Marcus nodded. I want to ask you something. What's that? Would you consider me for road captain again? I know I can't do everything I used to, but I can still plan routes, lead rides, and help out. Jackson smiled. Marcus, you never stop being part of this family. If you want the position, it's yours. Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him. Thank you. Don't thank me, Jackson said. Just keep being who you are. That's all we've ever needed. As darkness fell and the rally continued around them, Marcus thought about the journey he'd been on, the accident that nearly destroyed him, the generosity that saved him, the determination that rebuilt him. He thought about the drunk driver who'd hit him and never stopped, someone he'd never met, but whose choices had altered the entire trajectory of his life. He'd spent months angry about it, but he'd realized that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. So he'd let it go. Not because the driver deserved forgiveness, but because Marcus deserved peace. He looked at his son, laughing and running around with the other kids, growing up surrounded by men who would teach him about honor, loyalty, and standing up for what's right. This was what mattered. Not the accident, not the pain, not the struggle, but this moment, this community, this second chance at life. Marcus stood up from his chair, testing his rebuilt hip and leg. They ached. They always would, but they worked. He walked over to where the bikes were parked and ran his hand along the seat of his Harley. The leather was smooth and warm from the sun. Jackson walked up beside him. You good? Yeah, Marcus said, smiling. I'm good. Want to take a ride? Jackson asked. Just around the grounds. Marcus looked at his friend, his brother, the man who'd refused to let him fall through the cracks. Yeah, he said. Let's ride. They mounted their bikes. The engines roared to life. Side by side, they rode slowly through the rally grounds, past hundreds of people who'd gathered to celebrate community, freedom, and brotherhood. The wind felt good on Marcus's face. The rumble of the engine beneath him felt like coming home. And for the first time in years, Marcus Chun felt truly whole. Not because his body had been repaired, though it had. Not because he'd overcome impossible odds, though he had. But because he'd learned the most important lesson life could teach. You're never truly alone as long as you have people who refuse to give up on you. And sometimes, all it takes is a 7-year-old boy with enough courage to ask for help to set everything in motion. 3 years later, Ethan turned 10. Marcus threw him a birthday party at the clubhouse. The Iron Brotherhood was there, of course. So were dozens of kids from Ethan's school, families from the community center where Marcus worked, and even Dr. Morrison, who'd become a friend to the family. As Marcus watched Ethan blow out the candles on his cake, surrounded by people who loved him, he thought back to that hospital bed where he'd lain broken and hopeless. If someone had told him then that he'd not only walk again, but ride again, live fully again, he wouldn't have believed them. But here he was, living proof that miracles happen when people decide to show up for each other. Jackson came up beside him with 2 beers, handed one to Marcus. To second chances, Jackson said, raising his bottle. Marcus clinked his bottle against Jackson's. To brotherhood. They drank, and somewhere in the distance, a motorcycle engine roared to life, the sound of freedom and possibility echoing across the Arizona desert. Tell me, if you were in Jackson's position, would you have done the same? 5 years after the accident, Marcus stood in front of a group of 30 people at a community center. They were all facing medical debt, catastrophic bills, situations that seemed hopeless. The nonprofit, the Iron Brotherhood, had started, called Second Chance Road, and had grown significantly. They'd helped 47 families so far, raising over $800,000 through various fundraising efforts. Marcus was now the director. I know what you're going through, Marcus told the group. I know what it feels like to lie in a hospital bed and wonder how you're going to pay for the treatment that might save your life. I know what it's like to feel like a burden to your family, to feel hopeless." He paused. "But I also know what it's like to have people show up for you. People who barely know you. People who give even when they don't have much to give themselves. And I'm here to tell you that you're not alone. We're going to help you figure this out." After the meeting, a woman in her 40s approached Marcus. She was crying. "My daughter needs a kidney transplant," she said. "We can't afford it. We've exhausted every option." Marcus took her hand. "Tell me your story." And just like Ethan had done 5 years earlier, this mother told her story to someone who'd been there, someone who understood, someone who cared. And the cycle of giving continued. Ethan, now 12 years old, watched his father work with these families. He saw the impact, the hope, the transformation. He understood now what his 7-year-old self had started. He'd been terrified that day, taking those 2 buses across the city to find the Iron Brotherhood. He'd been scared they'd turn him away, scared they'd forgotten his father, scared he'd fail. But he'd gone anyway because his father was worth fighting for. One evening, as they drove home from the community center, Ethan asked his father a question. "Dad, do you ever think about that drunk driver? The one who hit you?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes." "Why?" "I used to be so angry at him," Ethan said. "I wanted him to suffer as you suffered." Marcus nodded. "I felt that way too for a long time." "What changed?" Marcus thought about how to explain it. "I realized that holding on to anger was only hurting me. And I realized that if that accident hadn't happened, maybe I wouldn't have reconnected with the Brotherhood. Maybe we wouldn't have started Second Chance Road. Maybe we wouldn't be helping all these families." Ethan frowned. "So you're saying the accident was a good thing?" "No," Marcus said firmly. "The accident was terrible. It caused immense pain and suffering. But what came after, the way people responded, the community that formed, the lives we've been able to touch, that was good. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the most meaningful ones. Not because the bad thing was necessary, but because of how we choose to respond to it." Ethan thought about that. "I'm glad you're okay, Dad." Marcus reached over and squeezed his son's shoulder. "Me too, buddy. Me too." On Marcus's 45th birthday, the Iron Brotherhood threw a surprise party at the clubhouse. When Marcus walked in, over 100 people were there. Not just bikers, but families they'd helped through Second Chance Road. People whose lives had been touched by the ripple effect that started with one little boy asking for help. Jackson presented Marcus with a custom leather vest. On the back, it read "Road Captain" with the Iron Brotherhood patch. Below it was another patch that read "Second Chance Road Founder." Marcus put it on, and it fit perfectly. Jackson raised his glass. To Marcus Chun, Jackson announced to the crowd, "A man who knows what it means to fall down and get back up. A man who turns pain into purpose. A man who rides for those who can't." The crowd cheered. Marcus looked around at all these faces, all these lives interconnected through acts of kindness and generosity. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. You gave me a second chance. And I promise to spend the rest of my life passing that forward." Ethan, now standing beside his father, raised his own glass of soda. "To my dad, the toughest guy I know." More cheers. More applause. As the party continued into the night, Marcus found a quiet moment outside. He looked up at the stars, the same stars he'd looked at from that hospital bed years ago, wondering if he'd ever stand again. He thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. His choice to leave the club for fatherhood. The drunk driver's choice to get behind the wheel. Ethan's choice to be brave. Jackson's choice to say yes. Every member's choice to contribute. The community's choice to rally. His own choice to fight through the pain and keep going. Life was a series of choices, some made by us, some made by others, all interconnected in ways we couldn't always see. Jackson came outside, saw Marcus looking at the stars. "You good?" Marcus smiled. "Yeah, I'm good. Just thinking about how far we've come." "A long way from that hospital bed," Jackson observed. "A long way," Marcus agreed. Jackson was quiet for a moment. "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" Jackson looked at his friend. "That 7-year-old kid who walked into our clubhouse. The courage that took." Marcus nodded. "He saved my life. He saved more than that. Jackson said. He reminded all of us why we started this brotherhood in the first place. It wasn't about the bikes or the parties or even the rides. It was about being there for each other when it mattered. Marcus felt tears forming. You're right. And now look at what we've built. Second Chance Road is helping people all over the state. We've inspired other clubs to start similar programs. That kid's courage started a movement. They stood together in comfortable silence, two brothers who'd been through hell and come out the other side stronger. Inside, the party raged on. Laughter and music spilled out into the night. Out here, under the stars, Marcus felt at peace. His body still ached sometimes. His rebuilt hip would never be quite right. He'd never ride as long or as hard as he once did. But he was here. He was alive. He was making a difference. And that was more than enough. If this story touched you, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. You're part of this family now. 10 years after the accident, Marcus stood at the grand opening of the Second Chance Road headquarters. What had started as a small nonprofit run out of the clubhouse had grown into a full organization with an office, staff, and partnerships with hospitals across 3 states. Ethan, now 17 and applying to colleges, gave a speech at the opening. He talked about being that scared 7-year-old. He talked about watching his father fight to walk again. He talked about learning what real courage looks like. My father taught me that asking for help isn't a weakness, Ethan told the crowd. It's one of the bravest things you can do. And when you receive help, you have a responsibility to pass it forward. That's what Second Chance Road is all about. The applause was deafening. Marcus stood in the back, overwhelmed with pride. Jackson was beside him. Your kid turned out pretty good, Jackson said with a smile. Wonder where he learned that, Marcus replied. They both laughed. After the ceremony, a young woman approached Marcus. She was in her early 20s, holding a baby. Mr. Chen? Marcus turned. Yes? I don't know if you remember me, she said. You helped my family 4 years ago. My father needed heart surgery. You organized a benefit ride that raised enough money to cover it. Marcus studied her face, then recognition dawned. Amanda? She nodded, tears in her eyes. My dad's doing great. He got to walk me down the aisle at my wedding last year. And he got to meet his granddaughter. She held up the baby. This is Hope. I named her that because of what you gave us. Marcus felt his own eyes getting wet. He reached out and gently touched the baby's hand. She's beautiful. Thank you, Amanda said. Thank you for giving me more time with my father. That's what it's all about, Marcus said softly. These moments, these connections, these chances to be there for the people we love. After Amanda walked away, Marcus found a quiet corner and just breathed. This was the legacy. Not the accident, not the pain, but this. The lives saved. The families kept together. The hope restored. Jackson found him there. You ready for the next chapter? What do you mean? Jackson pulled out an envelope. Inside was a check for $250,000. What is this? Marcus asked, stunned. Anonymous donor, Jackson said. Wants to fund a scholarship program through Second Chance Road for kids whose parents faced medical crises. Kids like Ethan. Marcus couldn't speak. The amount was staggering. We're calling it the Ethan Chun Courage Scholarship, Jackson continued. For kids who showed exceptional bravery in the face of a family crisis. Marcus finally found his voice. Ethan's going to freak out. Jackson grinned. That's the idea. As the sun set on that day, Marcus rode home on his Harley. The wind felt good. The engine purred beneath him. His rebuilt body ached in familiar ways. But he'd learned to accept that pain as part of his story, not the end of it. He thought about that drunk driver sometimes still. Wondered if the person ever knew what they'd done. Wondered if they'd face consequences. He'd never found out. The police investigation had gone cold. But Marcus had made peace with it. Because holding on to that anger would have poisoned everything good that came after. And so much good had come after. He pulled into his driveway. Lily was on the porch, reading a book. She looked up and smiled as he cut the engine. Good day? She asked. The best, Marcus said, walking up the steps. He still walked with a slight limp. Always would. But he walked. He kissed his wife. Told her about the scholarship fund. Watched her eyes fill with tears of joy. Inside, Ethan was at the kitchen table, working on college application essays. Marcus looked at his son, now almost a man, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Not just for the surgery and recovery, but for this boy who'd been brave when Marcus couldn't be, who'd asked for help when Marcus was too proud, who'd saved his father's life by simply refusing to give up. "Dad," Ethan said, looking up, "can you read my essay? It's about the accident, the brotherhood, everything." "Of course," Marcus said, sitting down. Ethan handed him the pages. Marcus began to read. The essay opened with, "When I was 7 years old, I took 2 buses across the city to ask strangers for help saving my father's life. I was terrified, but I'd learned something important from my dad. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing it anyway." Marcus read the entire essay, tears streaming down his face. When he finished, he looked at his son. "This is beautiful, Ethan. You think it's good enough?" Ethan asked nervously. "It's perfect," Marcus said. "It's your truth. That's all any story needs to be." That night, the 3 of them sat on the porch. The Arizona sky was clear, stars scattered across the darkness like diamonds. Marcus thought about the journey, from the clubhouse where it all started, to the hospital bed where he'd been broken, to the physical therapy room where he'd learned to walk again, to the nonprofit offices where he now spent his days helping others. It had been 10 years. 10 years of pain, growth, setbacks, and victories. 10 years of learning what really matters. And sitting there with his wife and son, Marcus knew he wouldn't change a thing, because every struggle had led him here, to this moment, to this life, to this purpose. The night was quiet except for the distant sound of motorcycles on the highway. Marcus smiled. Somewhere out there, riders were heading home. People were facing their own struggles. Families were holding together or falling apart. And tomorrow, he'd wake up and do what he'd been doing for 10 years. He'd show up. He'd help. He'd be there. Because that's what brotherhood means. That's what second chances are for. And that's what happens when one brave little boy refuses to accept that his father's story is over. Marcus reached over and took Lily's hand. Ethan leaned back in his chair, content. And under the vast Arizona sky, the Chen family sat together, living proof that sometimes the end is just the beginning.